Hello, welcome to the inaugural Regional Network Meeting PowerPoint recording to an audience of nobody. So this is for March of 2020. There's our cover slide, and I'm moving along here to our agenda. So we've got the CDE update. We've got these monthly topics. We've got, we'll talk about the resources too. The report of the month is student gains, and then we have some activities with it. Starting with the CDE update, this is the same slide we've had in January and February. The one difference is we did change these dates at CDE direction. The due date for the application was February 28th, like the document has been saying all along, but because they had a lot of those issues with agencies appealing and granted later due dates, bottom line is the CDE review, as well as the local workforce board reviews, is now for the second half of March rather than the first half of March. Obviously, some of you were part of that CDE call on the 17th, so you know good and well the CDE review will not start until the 17th with that initial meeting. The other dates, as far as I know, are the same as what we've had listed for a while. This next slide we had in our February PowerPoint. This is just giving the web page with all the information about the application, FAQ page, and that EDD guideline talking about the specific instructions all the local workforce boards need to follow in order to be in compliance with their review. The application's over, but a lot of people still have questions about it, so it made sense to keep that page intact. So here are our monthly topics. We've got the Employment and Earnings Survey, NRS performance goals, and IELCE updates. You know, those are the big ones. We had a couple others that we went ahead and moved to the resource section after talking with Amokela and CDE. So starting with the survey, we just have a few slides here on this one. The big thing to bring up to everybody about the survey, I believe, is we just got through doing a very exhaustive help document on this survey. It was about the third or fourth iteration of that help document. We keep having to hit the drawing board because more and more questions keep coming up. But just a couple days ago, we finished and posted a help document. It was a very long document on how to complete all the steps of the student portal, how to complete all the steps of that customization, all of those different things related to the listers and so on. So there's a very exhaustive help document. We did send it out to like 10 or 12 people in the field. The feedback we received was very positive, so we feel much better about this help document than we did about the previous one. So if people are having trouble with it, the short answer is to go to the website and download that new and improved help document we most recently posted on the Employment Earnings and Survey. This first chart is from that new document. It's providing an update to that timeline grid that, of course, has been one of the biggest reasons why everybody's been royally confused. I'm going to move to the next slide. You know, that part in italics at the bottom refers to the survey timeline. Again, the timeline's been a really big issue. This is a sample timeline. We're just doing the first quarter just because it's the first quarter. So again, obviously the first day of the first quarter is July 1. So what we're saying is the recommendation continues to be to do 100% of your surveying within that reporting quarter that you're required to do. So for example, if you're doing the first quarter surveying, you should try to get it all done in July, August, and September. The final day of the quarter, of course, is September 30th. We're still strongly recommending that 100% of that surveying be done by September 30th. If you look at the part in italics at the bottom, this is why I kind of hedge on this a little bit, as we've talked about this a little bit, I think, already. But a big issue that's come up is when we first did this survey wizard, we had it set to where you were required to run that student portal wizard during that reporting quarter. So what that means is if you're doing the first quarter, you can run the wizard up until September 30th, because September 30th is the last day of the first quarter. If you try to run it after September 30th, then it's not going to work because it's not the first quarter anymore. So the way it was set up originally is if you ran the wizard on October 1st, the wizard would work just fine, thank you very much. However, if you did it October 1st, then you're running it for the second quarter, not the first quarter, because again, October 1 is the first day of the second quarter. If you're doing it in September, it's still the first quarter. That's how it was originally set up in TE. What happened, though, of course, is that no matter what we do, a certain number of agencies are going to forget to do it or ignore the requirement or whatever. So when we at CASAS and when the folks at CDE would go back to those delinquent agencies, there was not an ability for them to make it up late so they could still get through the requirement. So what we've done now is move that final day. In this example, the last day to run the wizard would be October 31 instead of September 30th. So the recommendation continues to be to get this done by September 30th, but truth be told, the mechanical drop dead date would be October 31 in this example. If we're talking second quarter, it would be January 31, not December 31, and so on. So we're saying do all the student portal work during the quarter and then that last month. So in this example, do all the student portal by September 30th and then use the month of October to do the postcards, the in-person interviews, the phone calls, and all that sort of stuff. That's how we're going to do it. What we're also going to be doing is we will adjust TE. So if you're doing it the old-fashioned way by postcard or phone call, you'll always be able to make those edits. We won't have a drop dead date for that anymore. And then again, just finishing the slide, you can see we're doing all the surveying July, August, September, but the due date remains the exact same date as the data due date in this example, October 31. I'll note when we did this first round of the PowerPoint, there was a meeting that we had with CDE CASAS where we were talking about maybe moving the due date for the survey up 1 month. I'll just say we stopped doing that now, so the due date will continue to be the same date as the data due date. You know, in fact, what I'm going to do, I think, is I'm actually just going to delete that because that I think is going to cause everybody confusion. So you're going to get to see the deletion in the recording. Oh boy, oh boy. Okay, moving along. We have a couple examples. These are slides we've included before, but the first one is for the third quarter. This is obviously the quarter we're in, so this is the obvious one to give as an example. So third quarter of 1920, we're doing the follow-up in January, February, or March. The due date is April 30th. For that third quarter of 1920, we've got two buckets again. We're following up on the people who exited in the first quarter of 1920. That is, those are the ones 2 quarters after exit. We're also following up on those who exited in the third quarter of last year. That is, we're following up on those 4 quarters after exit. Just to give one more example for posterity's sake, here's the fourth quarter. That is the follow-up we're doing in April, May, and June. So the reporting quarter is the fourth quarter of 1920. So that time we'll be following up on those who exited in the second quarter of 1920. That would be the 2 quarters after exit. We'll also be following up on those who exited in the fourth quarter of last year. That would be the 4 quarters after exit. Again, we're just doing 2 examples. It gets a little crazy doing too many of these, but we've got 2 separate examples just to reinforce that issue that you've got the 2 different buckets every quarter. That's been another source of confusion. There isn't just 1 bucket anymore. Per federal guidelines, there's 2 buckets of follow-up we must do, not 2. That is the 2 quarters after exit and the 4 quarters after exit. One bird walk on this that's also been a big source of confusion field-wide is when we do the 2 buckets in TE. One thing I believe that's caused confusion is that the TE behavior in that wizard for the students who are 2 quarters after exit is a little bit different than the TE behavior for students 4 quarters after exit. The short answer is those who are 4 quarters after exit are handled automatically. Those who are 2 quarters after exit are not. So when you run the wizard and the wizard identifies those students who are 4 quarters after exit, Once you run the wizard, there's nothing else you need to do. TE will automatically identify those students, automatically transition it to the student portal, automatically send out those emails or texts to all those students who are 4 quarters after exit. So I think that misleads agencies into thinking the wizard will do everything for you. Once again, the short answer is no, it doesn't. It does that for those who are 4 quarters after exit, but it does not do that for those who are 2 quarters after exit. For 2 quarters after exit, it will go through the process and correctly identify those who are 2 quarters after exit. It'll prepare the report and send it over to the student portal. However, it will not send out the emails or text to the students until you complete the wizard and complete those steps of customization. The issue is those who are 4 quarters after exit, the agency has already made those decisions. The agency has already decided whether to include the logo, whether to include a welcome greeting or a thank you greeting, whether to identify each student's native language, and so on. For those who are 2 quarters after exit, it's the first time they've come up in this wizard, so obviously the agency hasn't yet made those decisions. Hence, the difference between the behavior for 4 quarters after exit where we've made those decisions versus those who are 2 quarters after exit where we haven't. So for those 2 quarters after exit, you must complete the wizard. It's up to each agency whether or not you want to include those customization steps, but you must at least go through the wizard and indicate in the wizard whether you are or are not going to add those extra steps, yes or no. TE will not send out the text or the email to those students until you complete those decisions. The biggie and the reason why TE is being so gosh darn stubborn, you might say, is in particular with the step where you need to indicate whether you want to send it out via email, via text, or both. For those other things where you're doing a logo or a thank you greeting, it's not really that big of a deal. But for that one step where you're deciding email or text, we really feel like that's critical. Obviously, some agencies will have phone numbers, but not emails. Others will be the opposite. So we haven't really figured out a way to get out of that step. That's a step that agencies necessarily need to address, thereby the TE behavior must be the same as it is. Okay, so moving along here, the next big topic for March are NRS local performance goals. So you can see here on the screenshot, we've got a copy of the NRS Table 4 and TE. We also have a copy here of the CASAS data portal. This is just to show to everybody that we have both ways. You can do it either way. You could go into TE and look at NRS Table 4, 4B, and Persister and TE, or you can go and do this on the data portal. It doesn't matter. You say tomato, I say tomato on that. I will go out of my way to say, for my 2 cents, I think the better way to do it is to use the CASAS data portal, not TE. It's a little easier. It's a little more user-friendly. You can run multiple years on one screen. You can run multiple agencies on one screen. All of that just works a lot easier, I think, using the data portal. But I'll just reiterate, you say tomato, I say tomato on that. You can do it either way. Either will work for this purpose. All that said, to the point I just made in this PowerPoint, we're using examples from the CASAS data portal. So what we've done is we're just showing screenshots in the data portal. I'll add, we really didn't do any of the mechanical stuff in the data portal because we just had that detailed mechanical explanation in the February PowerPoint. That was definitely an on purpose, not an accident. So if people are confused by the data portal, my suggestion would be to refer them to that February PowerPoint where we really got in the weeds with those mechanical steps. We defined all the issues in each of those drop boxes. So if people don't know how to use the data portal, refer them to the February PowerPoint where we really dig into that. Now that we're in March, we're assuming everybody understands how to use the data portal, at least from a mechanical point of view. So we went into the performance table 4 section and just drummed up the 19 data for a sample agency. So you can see here, we've got the goals, we got the goal for this year, we've got the goal for last year, as well as the California state average for last year. You can compare to all of those different things. You know, now we've run that one agency's data for last year, so we can compare and contrast. So the first thing we're saying is, hey, you just run your agency's data for the most recent year, compare it to the state goals, compare it to the state average. What that should do is quickly enable you to identify a few areas of strength. Hey, we're at or above the state average, we're at or above the state goal. That good agency there, we're doing good there. Others where we might be at or below the state goals, that obviously represents areas in which we need to improve. Some agencies are spectacular, some are really problematic, but the overwhelming majority of agencies, of course, are going to be a mixed bag. They're going to have a few areas where they're doing really well and represent areas of strength. They'll probably have a few other areas where they're doing not so well and represent areas of weakness or areas where they need to improve. So we go ahead and do that with the most recent year. We can kind of make tentative decisions on areas of strength versus areas of need. One thing we would definitely recommend is look at the long game before finalizing these decisions. So in this example, we're running 3 years worth of agency data for 18-19, for 17-18, and for 16-17. We're going ahead and running through all of these, you know, for the 3 years worth. That is, you know, you can run the last year. The most recent year is obviously going to be the most useful, but before we firmly decide what our areas of strength are versus our areas of weakness, good idea to compare with a few previous years to verify whether, hey, we're looking really good in these areas, but hey, let's make sure that it wasn't just a fluky year where maybe in 18-19 we were really good, but in prior years we were not. So we might need to kind of wait and see before we jump to conclusions. If it's an area of weakness, same thing applies. Hey, we really are looking below average in this area. Let's go ahead and double check and look at 2 years ago and 3 years ago. Let's verify that we've been consistently above average or consistently below average in this area before really deciding whether or not it represents a good area to establish for our goal. Then here's a truncated screenshot, same CASAS data portal, same agency, but we truncated the screenshot so we can really look more easily and identify those areas of strength versus others that need improvement. So here we've looked at it and we're looking at ASE low, ASE high, as well as the lower levels of ESL for this specific agency. We're just honing in on this because these seem to be the areas of strength and need for this specific agency. So moving along here, you see that red arrow is pointing to an arrow where we're below average that represent an area of need. That green arrow is pointing to an area that looks like it's an area of strength where we might be able to pat ourselves on the back. So specifically, we're identifying ASE low as an area where this agency may need improvement. You can see it right there. We're at 22%. The average is 45%. The goal was 37%. You can see, regardless of whether we use average or a goal, this is an area where this agency is severely underperforming, definitely an area where this agency needs to improve. On the other hand, we've got ESL beginning literacy. We're at 63%. That's as opposed to a goal of 59%. So that's an area where we can definitely say we're doing well and say, yeah, we're doing well with our low-level ESL learners in this example. So again, we're just looking to identify a couple areas where we really need to improve, as well as a couple areas where we're doing strong. Obviously, where our focus is going to be is the areas in red. That is the areas where we need to improve. Those are obviously the areas that we need to consider as areas where we establish NRS local performance goals. So I'm leaving it at this for March. For the March PowerPoint, we're looking at this basic step at looking at our TE reports and or looking at our CASAS data portal. We're just sticking with the mechanical data aspect of this for March, where we can go on the data portal or look at our table 4 and look quickly and easily and make this determination of where we're strong and where we're not so strong, we'll take the next step in the April PowerPoint. The issue is there's a lot to digest here, so we're keeping it easy on everybody by just doing one portion of this. The other part of it is, you know, we obviously, in the interest of time, have other things we need to do. So again, we'll get into some follow-up steps in April. We'll get even deeper in the weeds in May. This will be a multi-part series. But one thing that might be good to point out that we're not explicitly pointing out, again, mechanical data points, this is how we identify areas of strength. This is how we identify areas of need. Taking it to the next step that's worth maybe mentioning here, though, is when we're looking at establishing goals. One good thing to do that's right in front of you is looking at the data, looking at that number in parentheses. You can see right below the percentage. So you can see we've got ASE low and ASE high side by side. Both of those you can see from the data are areas in which we need to improve. I'll just say we chose ASE low instead of ASE high in this example because of that number in parentheses. That is usually, not always, but usually we probably want to focus on the bigger numbers in parentheses here because the number in parentheses indicates the number of students who qualified at each level. That's something we went over in February. But in this case, for ASE high, we've got a dismal percentage, but it's only 71 students. ASE low, the percentage is not quite as low, but it's it's twice as large here, 124 students in ASE low. So even though the percentage isn't quite as bad, in our mind, we feel like this is the bigger priority because ASE low is more bang for the buck. That is, it's identifying an area of need with a larger group of students in that level. To be clear, there's no definitive rule that requires you to do it that way, but for my 2 cents, when you're identifying which areas you really want to identify as your goals, obviously it's a really good idea to look at how many students our efforts are going to affect. And in general, the levels that have the higher number of students are the best levels to select when we're selecting levels for performance goals. Same thing with the SL beginning lit. You can see an even larger number there. Another good thing to look at when we're looking at the numbers is just looking at realistic goals. So when we're looking at ASE low as a goal, you can see we're not just below average, we're way below average here, where the goal is 37%, the average is 45%. We're way below that at 22% right here. So I'll just reiterate that if we just decided to wash our hands of this and say, okay, this year we're going to achieve the goal, most likely we're being highly unrealistic in doing so. So I'll just say the better way to go about our business here is look at the goal, compare it with, you know, what we're doing. In this case, we're not going to magically get the goal and make a miracle 15% gain in 1 year. So if we were this agency, yes, it would be a really good idea to set an NRS local performance goal for ASE low, but probably not such a good idea to be in fantasy land and think we're going to achieve the overall state goal. A more realistic goal here is you'd have to decide as a group what the best is, but I would say maybe 25%, maybe 28%. Maybe there's reasons to think we could pull vault up to 30%, but are we going to get all the way up to 37 or 45? I highly doubt it. So good to reiterate, it's not required that you achieve the average or goal in 1 year. If it's a long way away like this one, much better to do baby steps and establish something realistic. If that still puts you below the average or goal, that's 100% fine, but better to set a goal that's realistic. Okay, moving on to the third topic, we have the ILCE plan. Margaret provided these screenshots. So again, we'll have the due date for the plan is April 30th. You know, go out of your way to say we're not guaranteeing mid-March, but we got it out here a couple days ago. So we're thinking most likely it should be available in mid-March. We're not going to promise mid-March, but based on the fact that we got it in, we're hoping to have it available for everybody in mid-March. We realize the earlier the better, so there's a longer amount of time for agencies to work on this plan. So here's just a screenshot of what the plan looks like. Obviously, in terms of look and feel, it looks a lot like this year, like it did last year. Here's another screenshot Margaret provided. This is just to show that we're looking at those three components again. So that's really, in my mind, addressing the bottom part of the screenshot, where we're just showing that just like we did last year, we're looking at those three basic components just like we did this year, where for each, industry sector and career pathway at the agency, we're asking them to identify all the different pathways or all the different areas of training. Hey, we're doing welding, we're doing nursing or whatever at the agency. So there's a different screen for each pathway in each industry sector. So for each program we're including in our IELCE or integrated education and training at the agency is required to address each of those three components for each pathway. That is, for each pathway, how are we addressing workforce training? How are we addressing workforce prep? That is, which co-ops are we using? How are we integrating that workforce prep in the instruction? And then how are we addressing our ESL English language instruction? So it's addressing each of those three components for each career pathway. Then moving along here again, here it's just reiterating the same thing we just talked about with the components. It'll include those assurances from CDE just like we had to do last year, and then it will have some additional information on how agencies are addressing a single set of learning objectives. So moving along, here's those same three components. Again, we're making a big deal about that because that's the same basic framework that we're addressing on this year's plan, just like we did last year. So there's the components. That's that same slide with that goofy three-legged stool. I'll just say, there are some graphics in this presentation that I took out because I did have to hit the drawing board related to that 508 alt text compliance. That's what put a hold on this, on why I'm doing this a little late, is I did have to fix some things. The content of what we had here was 100% A-OK, but the 508 compliance wasn't, so there were a lot of extra alt tags I had to put in. In some cases, like with this screenshot, we just agreed it would be better to get rid of the screenshot than try to describe what the heck we mean by a three-legged stool, obviously. Next thing is we added from the CDE PowerPoint, just reiterating that the students need that opportunity to be co-enrolled in workforce training. There's been some additional confusion where some are thinking they're required to be in workforce training. To be clear, that's 125% false. They're not required to be in workforce training. They are, however, required to be given that opportunity to enroll in workforce training. So again, the fact that some students are in IELCE and in workforce training and some aren't, that's 125% A-OK. Not only is it 125% A-OK, but it's totally to be expected that some students might be ready for workforce training, others aren't. So in some cases, it might be a simple matter of student choice where they want to do this, but they don't really want to be in workforce training yet. Bottom line is, at the state and federal level, that's 125% A-OK. The feds have gone out of their way to say, yes, you must make sure you afford those opportunities to all learners. Not only is it A-OK, but you're really, as an agency, quite frankly, required to go out of your way to provide that opportunities for all learners. Thereby, you're really required to keep it open to everybody. That's the spirit of IET IELCE. That is a big part of this, is to try to make this program more accessible to all learners. If we're rigidly saying you've got to be in workforce training, we're going 125% against the grain of what this federal program is intended to do, quite frankly. So again, you've got to keep it integrated and so on. But the issue is you've got to provide the opportunity. That's what the policy is. Definitely definitely not required to have everybody in workforce training. So I'll just use the cliche I've been saying, that is, it's not required that you're able to get everybody to Oz, but you are required to pave the entirety of the yellow brick road. That is, you have to make it accessible to all learners. You have to have a way to provide learners open exit, open entry. You've got to make sure if students want to come into workforce training, leave and come back, it's exceedingly easy for the students to do so. The requirement is how you provide this to students, not that you let some students in and lock other students out. Okay, one way to look at this is through that document that EDD put out a few months ago. That is the WSD 09-03. This is what we've been talking about a lot at the EL Civics conferences. Is this perfect? No. Does this give everything everybody wants to know? Absolutely not. But it is something instead of nothing. This is by far the best document at any level to date, where it provides what sort of things constitute post-secondary workforce training, as well as what sort of things don't. That's really where I, anyway, think this is a very useful document, because prior to this, there was really nothing whatsoever available at the state level that provided these examples. We've all been there, where we finger-wagged agencies and told them what they had in their plan didn't really rise to the level of workforce training, but when asked to provide specific examples of what does and explain to them what does, we've been at an embarrassing low, level of answers for that. Whether it's us at CASAS or CDE, we've been 100% unable to give any good answers to those questions. So we're still not perfect, but at least now we have something instead of nothing, where we can actually provide answers when agencies ask that question, where we can refer them to this document that provides very specific examples of what is, as well as very specific examples as what isn't. So here's a list of things about what is: occupational certificate, occupational licensure, and so on. That is, industry recognized certificates that officially document the student as a certified X in the state of California. Next, here's a laundry list of what isn't. That is OSHA hand washing, CPR training, surf safe, those kind of things. Those shorter courses, the state is going out of its way to say, no, these are examples of things that do not rise to the level of workforce training. If this is all the agencies are doing, then there's a 100% chance they're not post-secondary. Thereby, there's a 100% chance that they're not really providing suitable workforce training. So these are some specific examples of what isn't. No matter what we do, obviously, we're going to have agencies that don't really fall on either list. So there'll still need to be some, thinking on our part on areas where they're rising to this level and areas where they're not rising to this level. So again, they does provide a very specific list of attributes of a quality post-secondary credential. So I'll just say I've already gotten quite a few questions on this. Here's some 6 adjectives that describe a quality post-secondary credential. The 2 that I believe come up the most are the second and third ones: transparent and stackable. Transparent is one that really I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of good and bad examples, but where the transparency issue is if you don't have something that's cut and dry, one really important issue is you need to make it as clear to the student as possible how the student can get there from here. So if you're saying the student doesn't have the skills to enroll in that program, it's on the agency to make it exceedingly clear exactly what that student needs to do in order to qualify for the program, and make it exceedingly clear once they meet that criteria, there's a 100% chance they're allowed in that program. It's okay for agencies to set prerequisites based on level. Probably better that they establish it related to CASA scores, where instead of relating it to level, which is a very flimsy way of doing it in my opinion, better to do it by, hey, you need a CASAS reading score of X, you need a CASAS math score of Y, or some similar way to show you need to get over this
bar in order to be qualified for this specific workforce training program. No matter how the agency does it, it's okay for that agency to set limits, but they need to make it very clear to all students what those limits are. And again, make sure that when students get over those limits, again, there's a 100% chance they're allowed into that workforce training program. That's one big barrier I've seen. The other one is stackable. That one will apply in more of a friendly way, where there's a lot of agencies that maybe have workforce training. A big one is business essentials is one you'll see. A lot of those related to childcare and teacher aid. For the most part, 99.9% of those are programs that don't come anywhere close, quite frankly, to that, positive slide here. There really aren't any occupational licenses or certificates related to teacher aid or home health aid or any of those kind of things. If that's the occupation they're doing, 99.9% likely their total failure on this in terms of having something relate to occupational licensure or occupational certificate. That said, that doesn't mean that they flat out can't do that or they don't qualify. But what that does mean is the level of effort they need to demonstrate in things like the ILCE plan is much, much higher. In particular, they need to show that they've made it stackable. Most of those programs in the areas I talk about in terms of hours are not nearly long enough if you just look at that particular course that addresses the specific area of workforce training. But I have seen some programs where they do a really good job of making it stackable, where if you just provide this one short little workforce training course, you're really not cutting the mustard, you're really not coming anywhere close. But if you stack 3 or 4 of those small courses together and you relate it in a meaningful way, then all of a sudden you have something. So what they really need to be thinking about, if they don't have that CTE course or WIOA 1 training in their backyard that provides occupational licensure or occupational certificate, then you just need to be more thoughtful in how you make all these different courses stackable. So at the end of the day, once they're able to put it together, they really have something and it results in a credential. The other thing I'll add that's not on the slide that's a good thing to bring up is if you have something that's informal like this that doesn't really have an official state credential or certificate, is to go to your local workforce board, show to your local workforce board that, yeah, we've got training that does not have a certified credential or whatever, but we know that this is something that in our local region is very important. We've heard this from students, we've heard this from employers over and over again, that it's a top priority in our region. So thereby, we've come up with a really good program that addresses this priority in the region. So thereby, we're going to work with you, the workforce board, to get it on that ETPL in your local region. If the agency can get it on your local ETPL, then quite frankly, we, the CASAS person or the CDE person, quite frankly, doesn't have a leg to stand on. If it's on the ETPL, they're a higher authority than we are or CDE is on this. If you can get it on the ETPL, well, then it's official. Then it is a certified credential. It may not have the state certificate, but in that local region, the local workforce board has already determined that it is. If the local workforce board determines that it is, then quite frankly, it just is. Okay, moving on to the next topic, this CASAS testing update. I think you've seen this one already, but Linda's put out some information on our test development. A lot of people have been asking about this all year, so we're submitting the listening and reading tests. We're going to meet that October 1 NRS deadline, so we'll be submitting all this on or before October 1. Again, if we're lucky, we'll hear in early 2021. Obviously, that's only if we're lucky. Who knows when we'll hear back from them, but that's the earliest possible. Obviously, reiterate that we would be very it would be very foolish of us to hold our breath and figure we'll hear about it in early 2021. The track record is obviously much, 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 much worse than that. But that's our rose-colored glasses hypothesis. So we'll hope to hear from them then. No matter what we do, you know, a lot of people have pointed out the quirkiness of why we're extended through February. Obviously, I don't know why that was, but obviously that would be a mess if everything expired in February. So we do feel like sanity will prevail, and that will be June 2021 instead of the exceedingly awkward date of February. And then, you know, the tests themselves, those new ESL reading tests, very similar to what we have now in goals, but not exactly the same. And then once we get through this process for the ESL listening and ESL reading, once we get through that, then our second highest priority will be to revise and update math goals. We only have those 2 levels available now. Lots of people have pointed out how that's kind of inadequate. So we'll be looking at having math available at all 4 levels instead of just 2. To that end, obviously, we're doing all this test submission work. So that means we've got lots and 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 lots of field testing available. A lot of our agencies, I'm sure, have been tagged already, but between now and the end of June, lots of opportunities available, in particular on the ESL side. So if anybody's interested in that, lots of opportunities to move along. Okay, next we have the resources. I'm not going to get into detail, but because we have so much for one meeting, we've tried to move a lot of details, maybe things that aren't on the front burner to the back of the PowerPoint. You know, things that we've talked about a lot already, maybe things that we want to reiterate, but we've already put it on the front burner. So we're going to move it back. Maybe things where we're just reading from the slide and isn't really a good use of time anyway. So we'll look at our deliverables. We'll bring deliverables to the front burner back in April when everything's due. But for now, we're moving it to the back burner. Census 2020, we've had for like 4 or 5 months in a row. It's still going on, so we're not taking it out, but we've talked about these census slides probably 4 or 5 times already, so it's still there if they missed it the first, second, third, or fourth time. Data portal we talked about last time, so same thing there. Here's a list of our CASAS Web Trainings, so you can see on the data side, we've got NRSDIR, periods of participation, local performance goals in the survey. There's a couple on completing the ILCE plan. So again, if you're interested in any of these web trainings, here are highlights for March and the specific dates of when we're offering each and every one of them. Similarly, here's some statewide conferences for March. These are all the state ones coming up in March, April, May. Here's a few national conferences, including, of course, our Summer Institute going on in April, May, and June. We haven't gotten full bore on the Summer Institute yet, but here's a slide on that. Registration is now available. What I'll just say is by far the most common question on that that's come up again and again is people have already registered for Summer Institute. The general registration is there. The registration for the labs is there, but different from last year is the accountability that we do on Wednesday is not there. The individual assessment implementation trainings we do throughout the Institute are also not there. So people are saying, what about those trainings that meet the requirement? That is CASAS implementation and California WIOA 2 accountability. Why can't I register for that? To be clear, we'll have a scanner that we're going to be using for all sessions. So the answer is we're not going to put that accountability for online registration. We're not going to be putting those basic implementation trainings either. We're going to make that walk-in. We'll account for everybody's registration for the requirement by scanning everybody in, scanning their badge or whatever as they enter. So to be clear, we are going out of our way to not do online registration for anything other than the lab sessions. For the lab sessions, that includes that extra fee. So because it includes that extra fee, we decided we really couldn't get from underneath that. Because it includes the fee, we really felt we absolutely must still continue to do online registration for that. But for those and the general registration, they can register on our website. Finally, we have our report of the month. We've been doing a TE report. It just started last month, so this is just the second time. So there was a meeting where they recommended student gains. So here's a screenshot of the student gains report in TE. The benefit of student gains is it basically has all of the positive attributes you have on reports, like all the different learning gains reports, as well as that student test summary report. So all the things you can find on the test summary, all the things you can find on learning gains are included in student gains. That is a list of students, when they took the test, which test form number they did, what their scale score was, and all that good sort of stuff. How many, all of the tests they did, so you can see pre-post test gains. The difference between student gains and those other reports you can use that have that same information is over on the right-hand side. It gives all the test information, but in addition, shows what all that test, pre and post test information means in terms of California payment points. So you can see the student took the 917M on this date. They took the 918M on that date. That places them into this level. That equates to an 11-point pre-post test gain. And because they made such a wonderful gain, you can see that shows that yes, that did result in a level completion. Yes, that did result in a California payment point in that example. So it shows which students and which test combinations resulted in a payment point. Furthermore, over even further to the right, it has those drop reasons. So it shows students that might have made a really good gain, but who maybe didn't get a payment point because they didn't provide required demographics or have 12 hours of instruction or whatever. So that's the one that we have here available. You can go over the screenshot, but it is a very popular report. Margaret has a little checklist here for what you can use for this. Make sure you add the forms. Make sure you can use this to identify who might still need a post-test. Look at those who have 0-point gains or very small gains or negative gains. Try to discern a pattern on those who didn't make enough gain to get that level completion. Also, you could look at those who have drop reasons. You might have some students that did a really good job on their pre and post testing, but in terms of payment points, maybe it's not looking nearly as good because you didn't add demographics or hours of instruction. So another thing, and this is something Margaret's added, a to-do list here. So, you want, just an overall to-do list, not just related to the report, but to all of those illustrious topics we've been talking about here for this month. So again, we're heading to the end of the third quarter. So look through your third quarter, fix data to correct missing information, prepare for that April 30th due date. Look at the ILCE plan. For March, you're not going to really submit the plan, but look at that plan as soon as we release it, mid to late March. Start planning for all the things you need to do in advance of the April 30th submission. And then finally, run the employment and earnings follow-up survey wizard in March. Identify all the students that exited in the third quarter. Complete all of those issues related to the student portal by the end of March, and make sure you're in good shape to do all those extra duties in April in advance of the April 30th deadline there. Then we've got an activity about the discussion on ILCE plans. look at the IET programs we have. How are we promoting them to students? How are we tracking attendance in that workforce training program? A little bit, applicable for some agencies, not for others, but look at ways where they might be working with their Title I and their local workforce development board. Look at whether the agency is providing workforce training locally or whether they've got an outside agency doing it. The bottom line is, in the plan, if they're doing it locally, that's not right. That's not wrong. If they're doing it with somebody else, that's not right or wrong either. But those agencies that are providing workforce training locally through their Career Tech Ed program probably have a different series of steps and a different set of priorities on their ILCE plan than if an outside agency is providing it. So if they haven't really thought through that yet, now is a good time to think through whether their training is outside their agency or within the agency. And then either way, how are they going to connect that workforce training with all of those workforce preparation activities going on in the ESL classes and with those EL Civics co-ops? And that's it. That's all we really have fit to print here. So I'm going to end the recording now. Feel free to contact me if there's anything that's not clear.